everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by LawSeco. Let's see what articles we will be discussing today from the Hindu as well as the Indian Express. So as you can see, your screen is already full of a lot of articles. So yes, we have 5 major articles that we will be discussing today. 2 of them are from the Hindu and 3 are from the Indian Express. Firstly, from the Hindu, we have the uncharted territory of outer space. So basically, as the name itself is suggesting, that here the requirement of an international legislation and also intergovernmental legislations that deal with the space technology and the rights of all the nations in an equal manner, keeping in mind the utilities of the space that we have, has been discussed. Then second article is bringing the internet to everyone. So it is more or less, it has been reiterated several times, but still it had some good facts in this article today. That is why we have taken it up again, and basically talks about giving internet as a basic right to all the people. Thirdly, UGC versus state. Now this is a very interesting article which talks about the recent, in a way, to say disharmony which is going on between the University Grants Commission and the states, and specifically the state of Maharashtra. So we'll be discussing that in detail. Then fourthly, taking jobs closer to the people. Now herein the benefits of the National Recruitment Agency that has recently been promulgated by the Union Cabinet, it has been discussed. And fifthly, an unserviced sector. Now, as we know that the Indian economy is not really faring well or doing well since about 1 to 2 years, but the role of service sector that has been very prominent and magnificent, keeping in mind the Indian economy, has been discussed, and how in the current scenario we have given less priority to the service sector and how can it be improved with time has been discussed. And finally, we have the news and flash column wherein we'll be discussing the crisp point in news, which is more important for our prelims exam. With this, let's have a look at the LawSeco courses that you can always go and avail. At the center of our attraction, we have the Lord of the courses, that is the Judiciary Test Preparation course, wherein all of you, those who are preparing for the Judicial Services exam, can definitely go and avail this course. The landing page, the link to the landing page has been provided in the comment section below, in the description section below. Now here you can also download for yourself free study material through which you can get a very crisply prepared study material that can help you in your preparation. You can also have a look at various other courses like for CLAT, All India Bar Exam, etc. And very shortly we are also coming up with the law optional paper for UPSC Civil Services exam. So you can also have a look once we have it in hand. Now let's see that what is the multiple choice question for the day. Pulikalli or tiger dance is a famous dance of which state? So please keep in mind this is Pulikalli, or it is also known as the tiger dance. Firstly, Karnataka. Second, Tamil Nadu. Third, Kerala. Or fourth, Andhra Pradesh. Now here is the descriptive question for you all, and if you know the answer to the multiple choice question, you may jot down the answer in the comment section below. And here for the descriptive question we have, keeping in mind the advantages of space science for the whole world, it is important to have in hand concrete international legislations and laws that ensure equitable rights of all the countries to access the space. Comment. So you can write down the answer to this question in 250 words, and you can write down it in the comment section below as well. Let's begin with the first article, as today it's going to be a bit of, I guess, a longer discussion today since we have a lot of important articles. So let's just quickly start with the first one, which talks about the outer space. So there have been, in the recent times, we know that more or less the focus has been on the COVID-19 and the pandemic and the effects of this pandemic, the vaccine, etc. And in this scenario, we have actually not paid a lot of attention to various space, propositions or even space advancements that have been made by several countries. Now, for example, Mission Mars by China and the United States, and UAE's Mars orbiter, which is known as the HOPE. Then SpaceX's first astronaut trip to orbit and China's completion of BeiDou satellite navigation system are some of the examples, and they have proceeded amidst COVID-19. So basically, obviously, we know that these were the plans and these were the space missions of these countries, wherein the planning and development of these missions had been going on since a long time, and that is why even in the times of COVID-19, these countries were actually able to bring in these projects into the real picture and send these missions to the space. But then again, one need that has come to our mind, and also as the author says, that if at all the nations are trying to become the superpowers in the terms of outer space as well, and they're trying to develop their technology more and more, and are trying to get a greater access to the outer space. So in such a scenario, it is very important that we have systems of cooperation amongst various countries, and if in case there is a dispute, then also that dispute can be settled peacefully. Basically, first, let's understand as to what are the reasons behind the space industry growing so fast. So, what are the actually driving factors to accelerate this process of space industry? Firstly, decreasing cost. Definitely. Earlier, the space missions were not really pocket friendly, and not all the nations, obviously, due to their different status of development, different economic status, all were not equally able to invest into space missions, and they had a lot of other priorities. Like even today, there are a lot of nations, like even the African countries, where even providing basic nutrition, health services, and other facilities to the citizens is a far-reached thought. So that even is very difficult in various countries. But earlier, keeping in mind a few years also ago, what used to happen was that the space missions were really costly. And that is why it was not possible for most of the countries to invest into such projects. But now the decreasing cost of this has actually made many nations equitable, and also have made them capable of investing into space agencies. Then they're saying that the price for reaching low Earth orbit, so basically when we compare the surface of the Earth, so as and when we start moving away from the Earth's atmosphere or into the Earth's atmosphere, there are different orbits that have been defined, and the lowermost is called as the low Earth orbit, or the lower Earth orbit. So it is called as the LEO. So this price for reaching up to the LEO has reduced to $2,720 per kg, from earlier it was approximately $54,000 per kg. So if, for example, for example, if there had to be a space craft or space shuttle or any space mission of 1 kg, which definitely is not the scenario, it is of tons and thousands of kgs at times. So even if it had to be of only 1 kg, the cost of that 1 kg had to be $54,500 in the even a decade before. But now it has come down to only and only $2,720 per kg, and also it is estimated that within a coming decade it will reach to as less as $100 per kg, which is quite minimal, which will be actually 7,000 rupees per kg if we do it into a rupees scenario. So that is quite affordable for many countries. Secondly, Bank of America report, the present $350 billion space market will touch $2.7 trillion by 2050. So according to this report of Bank of America, this has said that the total investment or the total value of the space from $350 billion will reach to $2.7 trillion by 2050. So definitely it is something that the nations are trying to invest more and more into. And thirdly, increase in the microsatellites. Now here, an example of the SpaceX. We must all know what actually SpaceX is. We must have all heard the name of Elon Musk. So basically he owns this company of SpaceX. It is a private company from the US, and it actually has a lot of inclination towards various technological advancements. And also SpaceX has recently made an initiative wherein here also we can see it was the first private entity to have sent astronaut trip to the orbit. And basically SpaceX is making a lot of projects to delve into the outer space limitations. So SpaceX's Starlink project, so the name of the project was Starlink, it plans to put more than 10,000 small satellites in low Earth orbits. Now, it is not only the countries, only the governments of these countries that are investing into the outer space, but now as we can see, also the private entities are also entering into this zone. Second, Amazon's Project Kuiper received US Federal Communications Communications Commission's approval for more than 3,000 microsatellites. So basically, microsatellites more or less are just like the larger satellites, but of course their range, their capability, and their functions are quite limited. But still, there are a lot of private entities who are now able and also willing to send these microsatellites into the Earth's orbit. Also, we should also remember the names of Starlink project, as it is linked with SpaceX, and Kuiper project, which is linked with Amazon. And as we know that Amazon also is owned by Jeff Bezos, who is the world's richest man currently, and also Amazon is also making great initiatives to get into space technology. And in a decade, there could be 80,000 microsatellites in space from 3,000 at present. So just imagine that just within next 10 years, the number which is currently to 3,000 would multiply to several times and would become approximately 80,000 or even more. So that is why we can see that a lot of crowd is very quickly going to enter the outer space, and that is why there is a high chance that where there are different kinds of claims, different entities are available, there is a higher chance that the claims might clash with one another and disputes might arise. And that is why it is desirable that we are ready in advance. Let's see with this that what are the challenges to space sector. Firstly, obsolete multilateral framework, but obviously if we at all have something or some multilateral framework, they have already become quite obsolete and are not appropriate for the current time. Why? Because they lack dispute settlement mechanism. Because just rush your mind. Can we recall of any proper international dispute settlement mechanism that deals specifically with the outer space? Hardly do we have any. Second, silent of collisions or debris. Now what happens is that actually by space debris we mean that many a times a lot of particulate or a lot of material, it actually floats into the outer space. Many a times what happens is that a spacecraft or a satellite or something, it just gets exploded or it just runs out of its function and it is of no more use now. And in such a scenario, slowly and slowly it starts breaking. This actually makes the debris. By debris, we simply mean just waste material that is not of any use. But then again, this debris, if it gets over collected, can cause a lot of problem, various environmental problems as well, various technological issues to the other satellites that are functioning in that zone, etc. And that is why there should be good initiatives in order to deal with this debris. Very recently, a new startup from India has been given an amount by the Indian government of approximately 25 lakh rupees for actually working in this regard. And this startup is trying to study the debris. Though, please keep in mind that this startup is not trying to collect the debris, but only to study it at the first place, and then it might take the later steps. Thirdly, provides insufficient guidance on interference. Now, as we just discussed, that if in case there is any kind of interference in the claims, then there are no sufficient guidance or guidelines available for that. Secondly, state-centric legal framework. So basically, if at all we have any framework, then it is more of state-centric, as in it gives or favors the idea of a particular state, that is a nation. And definitely the non-state entities, and like just we discussed SpaceX, Amazon, or the private entities, they are now included in space exploration and utilization, but they are not included in this legal framework. And that is why it is important that now a new kind of law is formulated wherein we also recognize the non-state entities also as the special providers of services in this space sector as well. The lack of alignment between domestic and international framework, and then risks unfair competition, as just we discussed, because many countries, they are not actually economically at par, and definitely it is a high chance that the bigger or the larger country might try to oppress the smaller one, and definitely it should not be the case. And that is why we should have some international laws that actually can check this practice. Then militarization of space, because we know that all the space activities in current scenario have a lot of utility when it comes to militarization. Because when we know, if in a situation of war or aggression, the satellites can be used hugely. For example, a very simple example I would like to give to all of you. Many of you must have watched the movie Uri. And you must have seen that how much was space technology playing an important role into it, because the surgical strike, the areas wherever the surgical strike had to be conducted, the coordinates, though they had the coordinates, but the clear location of those coordinates had been given by ISRO and DRDO with the help of the satellites that we have for India. And that is why it was just a small example. Satellites can play a really important role in providing the location of various areas, the militarization of the areas, wherever the people or concentration, etc., are available. So that is why, since space has now become so important for even the military and national security of the countries, the nations are more incentivized, to invest into this model. And that is why it is our high time that we invest legally also into this area. Now let's understand that what is India's space industry. So first, India's future programs include landing on the moon. As we know that Chandrayaan-2 had been successfully had been partially successful, and that is why we are still planning to have a successful landing on the moon. Then we are planning to have first Indian solar observatory, first crewed orbital space flight mission, and installation of modular space station in 2030. And also this is one of the biggest achievements till date that we have for in space. So basically it talks about bringing the private sectors also into this arena, just as USA is also doing, and it is under the Department of Space to promote private participation. And then definitely we need a space legislation, as we're also talking on the global level as well. Now let's talk about the internet for all. So more or less it's just the same thing, but only a few facts we would like to discuss with you. Wherein it says that since we are facing a lot of digital divide, and in the times of COVID-19, when we have to follow the norm of social distancing, so it is really ideal that we have in hand good digital techniques so that the people can still be virtually or in some other way connected. As also we know that the education system also has largely and majorly shifted on the online classes. Now here, the most important part of this article was that what are the steps that have been taken at both the international as well as the national level to provide better digital access. Firstly, on the international level, in 2016, the United Nations General Assembly passed a non-binding. Please keep in mind there can be a very potential prelims question from this, wherein just this word of non-binding can be switched with binding and we might get confused. So please keep in mind that this is a non-binding resolution by the UN General Assembly declaring internet as a human right. And at the national level also, various steps have been taken. Like, for example, in 2011, the National Optical Fiber Network project was launched, which actually aimed at connecting the most remote areas of the country also through optical fiber. Optical fiber means, like, for example, we get a connection of Geo or any kind of Wi-Fi connection done into our house or locality that basically works on the optical fiber network. And very recently also, this also should be kept in mind. We have also discussed it before, that now various co-islands and the major island of Andaman and Nicobar Islands also, they have been connected with the mainland India through submarine optical fiber network. By submarine, we simply mean underwater optical fiber network. And now that is why with this, better technological connectivity can be gained with the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Then in 2015, this above project was renamed as BharatNet and was integrated into the Digital India initiative. So as we know, please keep in mind that this National Optical Fiber Network project was later in 2015 renamed as BharatNet, and it was then integrated into the Digital India program. And then thirdly, the National Education Policy 2020, as we already have discussed at length about this, it has advocated greater integration of technology and how technology can play a supreme role in providing better and practical learning to the students. Then fourth, Punjab government has started distributing 1.75 lakh free smartphones to students, which actually is a very good step because in many remote areas of various states where the online learning had to go on, what has happened is that the students are not even able to avail basic internet facilities, and also they do not have smartphones to get their classes on. And that is why various governments have made this initiative to distribute these smart devices to the students so that they can get access to their online classes. Now, in the previous one, I would also like to discuss that in India, now right to internet is also a fundamental right, as it was held in the case of Anuradha Bhasin versus Union of India, and also state of Kerala also has held it as a fundamental right. So thus it is very important that we try to minimize this digital gap as soon as possible. Now in the next article, which is UGC versus the state, Basically, the idea of harmonious construction has in some or the other way been discussed. Basically, harmonious construction is when that if in any case there is a conflict between the center or the state, so it is ideal that both the center as well as the states, they move in a harmonious manner, and the law is implied and used in such a manner that there is no friction between the two, and a harmonious construction can be taken place between the two entities. And in this situation also, the recent clash between the University Grants Commission and state of Maharashtra has been discussed, wherein they're engaged in a vicious legal battle concerning examination of final year students amidst the pandemic. As we know that in India, the three most highly stricken countries with states with COVID-19 are Delhi, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu, which is the city is Chennai. So basically, we know that the situation in Maharashtra is not really good, and the state government is already battling a lot to bring down these cases and to make the norms of social distancing being followed properly. Now, in the very same scenario, the University Grants Commission has given this mandate that for all the states, it is compulsory to conduct the final year examinations. So basically, for those who are in their first year, second year, third, or any other year, so definitely basic exams can be taken, and if not, they can also be skipped and they can be given, they can be promoted to the next year, keeping in mind their previous performance. But the UGC has given this stance that if for final year students also, we do not conduct exams and we just promote them keeping in mind their previous performance, it would be a kind of, just say, compromising upon the quality of the degree that they are going to avail. But to this, the Maharashtra government has been contravening significantly, saying that the situation in Maharashtra is already very severe, and thus it is not really feasible on the one side for the government and also for the students of the various colleges in their final years to actually come or sit in the exam. Though UGC says that you can conduct the exams completely online or a mix of online, offline, or either way that you want, but you need to conduct the exams. This actually has risen the idea of what is the autonomy of the states or the state governments when it comes to higher education, because obviously the situation of every state is different due to this COVID-19. But an umbrella legislation that has come, or umbrella mandate that is coming from UGC, how can it be unilaterally or equally put up, or it can be equally followed by all the states, because obviously the situations are different and thus the mechanism to work will also remain different. So we have let's discuss that what are the key legal issues that are involved into this. Basically, entry 66, as we know that the list 1, 2, and 3 of the 7th schedule, the 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution has lists. All right, so there are basically 3 lists over there. List 1, which has the topics related to the center, list 2 for the states, and list 3, as we all know, is about the concurrent. On this, I would again like to ask a question from you all. How many schedules do we have in the Indian Constitution? If you know this answer, do write it down right now in the comment section. Let's see how many of you are able to answer this. So basically, from list 1, entry 66 of the 7th schedule talks of about having an entangled India's higher education in a web of qualifying and competitive exams, regulatory agencies, and professional bodies. So as a result, the center, please keep in mind, since this is an entry of the list 1, the deciding factor, the deciding agency would be the center, decides the curriculum and teachers, whereas the states pay the salaries. Now, this again becomes a question of dispute, that for the higher education, the center is the one who can decide the curriculum, who can decide the eligibility of the teachers, and so on and so forth. But the entire expense of this will be taken care by the states. Then, so one point of clash is this. Secondly, few efforts to evolve standards and linking with them to societal goals have been taken. So basically, national competitive exams have been de facto standards for education, and case study, basically just the competitive exams at the national level that we have, are considered to be as the standards or the level of education that we want. But the case study on local problems is absent from the curriculum. So basically, most of the exams that are competitive in nature, they are of the national level, and they talk about the issues of the national situation, but the local problems or the local case study have been absent from these curriculum. Like for example, Unnat Maharashtra Abhiyan was refused by the Ministry of Human Resource and Development, and that is why the people, even they hail from the particular states, remain very less aware about their own states and just learn and wrote memorize the topics related to the national system. Then elite institutions, central institutions such as the IIT or IISER are not regulated by UGC or MHRD, yet soak up considerable fund and prestige. So basically, as we know that the University Grants Commission has this basic, function of giving the grants, that is the funds to various universities. Here, huge institutions like the IIT and IISER, they are not actually regulated by the UGC or even the Ministry of Human Resource and Development, and yet they take up huge share of the funds coming from these two bodies, and that is why the funds that actually were more needed by the other smaller universities or colleges, they actually fall short of it. Then this is very important to be seen that what can be done in this scenario. Firstly, the court can direct that constitutional right comes with duties. Now here, as we know that the states also have a right to maintain the education, and that is why a process for providing in harmonious construction between the center and the state should be given by the court. And secondly, state can create a system open for professional opportunities, standards, and training for youth. So definitely we should incentivize the states, and we should also provide them with such facilities wherein they can create for themselves professional opportunity, standards, and training programs for youth, so that the youth belonging to any particular state are well equipped and trained for availing any kind of jobs or education in the further areas. Now let's discuss this next article for the day, which talks about the NRA, which is National Recruitment Agency, and the common eligibility test which it will be conducting. So just a few days ago, the cabinet, which is the union cabinet, it had made or it brought into the picture National Recruitment Agency, and it said that it will boost the transparency and eliminate multiple tests. So we had discussed this in our news in flash column, but today there was an exhaustive article regarding it as to what will be the pros of this, how will it function. So it is actually really important for us, and that is why we have taken up this article today. So basically, it will be conducting a single exam, which is the common eligibility test. Now, just the name itself is suggesting that it will bring in under its ambit 3 major exam areas, and for all those, a single test will be conducted. So basically, which are they? Firstly, the Railway Recruitment Board. Secondly, Staff Selection Commission, which are the SSC exam, and the IBPS, which is the Institute of Banking Personnel Selection. Please keep in mind a very potential prelims question can come directly from here as to which all 3 areas or 3 tests will be now cumulatively taken up under the common eligibility test under the NRA. So it is the RRB, SSC, and IBPS. So what are the previous governance reforms that have taken under the Modi government in last 6 years? Also, we should see as a background. Firstly, replacing documents attestation with self-attestation. So basically earlier a lot of documents had to be attested, we had to get them attested by various other authorities, but now mere self-attestation can work for a number of documents. Secondly, basically here the idea is to make the exam process or exam taking process more feasible and convenience for the aspirants. Because if you are making the exam process so cumbersome, it really disincentivizes the students to take up that exam. But if you're giving that exam at a very nominal fees, very nominal traveling, or in easy circumstances, more and more participation can be seen from the people. And that is why we are trying to remove such hurdles and trying to make this process faster and more transparent. Secondly, removing interviews for lower rung selections. Or earlier, for even the lower rank selections, the lower rung selections, also interviews were conducted, but now there will be no interviews. Then abolish. Please remember, this is not, these provisions are not under the NRA. These provisions are those which have been taken in the past or last 6 years altogether, and they are like adding to the cause of NRA, National Recruitment Agency, right? Then we have also abolished over 1,500 obsolete rules and laws that actually made the process of these exams more cumbersome. Fourthly, amendments to the Prevention of Corruption Act, which has made the system more transparent for the exam takers. Then new format for PM's Excellence Awards. So basically, those who are doing really well in such exams, they are being now given more of awards or incentivizations through this. Then introduce 3 months stint as assistant secretaries for new IAS officers. Then what are the benefits of the National Recruitment Agency Common Eligibility Test? Firstly, convenient and cost effective for the students, but obviously, if for example, one aspirant wanted to take all the 3 exams, just for example, let's assume like if there was an aspirant who wanted to take all these 3 exams. So earlier, what happened was that for all the 3, he had to go to all the 3 different areas, or which we call as the exam centers, had to take up 3 different exams, had to wait for the results of these 3 different exams, and then had to carry things accordingly. But now, for all these 3, he can just take up one exam, which is the common eligibility test, and then later on, if he gets selected, he can definitely choose a preference wherever he wants to go. This is something similar like for various services, national services like civil services like IAS, IPS, IRS, the exam, and even for the Indian Forest Services, the preliminary exam is same. Just take an example for Indian Forest Services and Indian Administrative Services. The prelims paper is same for both the exams. Once you're able to qualify the prelims, then you can decide that which mains do you want to take up. Either it is for the Indian Administrative Services or IPS, etc., or for the Indian Forest Services. So that actually makes the process easier and also gives you more dimensions to choose from. Secondly, provides provisions for conducting mock tests for rural youth and 24/7 helpline, which is a really good initiative because obviously the rural youth are not projected to very good resources and materials for studying, and that is why these mock tests will make them more of exam ready. And there will be also a helpline which will be available to them for 24/7. And thirdly, common portal and wide choice of centers, as we just discussed. Now, this will be the last article for the day, which talks about the service sector. So as we know that in the Indian economy, India is still an agriculture-based economy. We know that it focuses more on the primary sector, and it is primary sector is one of the biggest sectors in the country. But then again, after the primary sector, we do not have the secondary sector as that much of important, but the tertiary sector, that is the sector of the service that provides the biggest, remuneration, biggest GDP share to the country, and also biggest economic strength to the country. Also, if you remember, just a few days back, we discussed about the H-1B visas, which have been which have been suspended till the end year by Trump government and so and so. So why were we actually discussing that? Because India is one of the largest suppliers and also of the labor, as in the commercial service sector labor, and that is why India is the one country that holds the maximum of the H-1B visas, because we have been excelling into the service sector in which we are trying to provide. For a clearance, I would like to just give a brief as to what is the service sector. For example, IT professionals. Remember, the software engineers, the IT professionals, and those who are better off in providing any kind of services to the people. Now, these could be any services, technological services, or any kind of educational services, any kind of services. So this sector is called as the service sector. And India's economy is largely dependent on the service sector as well. But the author in this article says that since the recent times, we have had less of priority given to the service sector, and we should not really underestimate the power of service sector, and we should incentivize more and more into this area. So let's see that what was the scenario for the service sector's performance before the pandemic. It says that it had a share of 55% in the economy, which was still very huge. Secondly, 2/3 of the total foreign direct investment inflows into India are coming through the service sector. Secondly, 38% of total exports are going through service sector, and here an example from the H-1B visas can be given. Then according to the Nikkei India PMI index, so basically PMI is the Producers Managers Index. So it just actually talks about that how has the production or manufacturing taken place in your country, and this actually compares with the production or the manufacturing that took place in the just before month. Like for example, if we are currently in the month of August, so the PMI index for August will be something, and for July will be something. So a comparison between July and August can be drawn through the PMI, Nikkei India PMI index. Then as we get into the month of September, a comparison between the PMI, that is the manufacturing capability of the month of August, will be compared with the manufacturing capability or the manufacturing gains made in the month of September. So basically, it is the producer managers manufacturers index, managers index. So basically, it talks about the a comparative a study between one and the other month. So it stood at 57.5 in February 2020, up from 55.5 in January. So it actually increased. So it actually can be given the credit can be given to the service sector again. But after the pandemic, the situation is actually reversed. So the Nikkei PMI index is contracting since March with index of 34.2. Now, as we see that it was in February, it was 57.5. And from March, in March it became 34.2. So actually it is contracting, and by PMI index contracting, we can say that the manufacturing or the production to say capability of our country is decreasing or shrinking. Then tourism, comprising nearly 10% of GDP, saw large-scale reduction in jobs and returns decreasing up to 10%, because we know that we are bringing back the people and migrants back to India. That is why a lot of impact has been seen on the service sector. Then the aviation sector. So see, aviation sector is also one of the service sector. Hospitals, schools, tourism, aviation, etc. These are all the examples of service sector. So service sector is expected to have lost $3.6 billion from March to June. This is really, really huge. But then let's see that what are the steps that can be taken. First of all, we can give cuts in the VAT, which is the value added tax. So we can actually give some cuts so that the people are more incentivized and they come into service sector and they join back the service sector. Secondly, we should introduce GST holidays. So basically, GST holidays can be introduced so that the people, they feel a bit of relaxed, and they also feel to be a better part of the service sector. Thirdly, compensate for wages of workers, because we know that after the pandemic, a lot of workers from the service sector, they have lost their jobs. As we know that even America, for example, if we take example of America, it is trying to become a bit of protectionist and trying to save its jobs for its native people first. In such a scenario, a lot of people have lost their jobs over there who were earlier working in the service sector in America and have returned back to India. So the government should try to compensate a bit for the wages, the lost wages of these workers. Fourthly, draft flexible terms for working capital. But obviously, if in the times of pandemic we are not flexible, we will not be able to cope with the time. Fifthly, rationalize export incentive schemes. Obviously, such schemes that incentivize the service sector to export more and more. Export as in, here we want to export more of services in the global market, and that will make India more competitive and will give us back more remuneration. Sixth, announce scheme-based export incentives, almost the same point. And seventh, provide other interim reliefs wherever required. So this was all for the day. I know it was a very exhaustive discussion, but yes, it was very interesting, I guess, and also more very important too. Now let's see that what do we have for news in flash today. Firstly, Pulikalli. Now here you might get the answer to this to the MCQ for the day. Pulikalli or tiger dance is a part of Onam celebration. I hope you all remember that when we were young in our schools, we used to celebrate. We used to learn about the various festivals. Onam, Pongal, etc. These used to be very famous festivals of South India. And Onam is celebrated in Thrissur, which is in Kerala. But due to COVID-19, it will be performed online now. So earlier, the Pulikalli or the tiger dance used to be performed on streets and various other public gatherings, and people used to accumulatively witness this dance performance. But now it will be done online in this year. The dance was introduced by Shakthan Tampuran. So this is another important name. This can be a very potential prelims question. Please note it down that this dance was first introduced by Shakthan Tampuran, who was the ruler of Yor over 2 centuries ago. So this is something how it looks like. So they actually paint their body like a tiger, and they also wear tiger mask and clothes like tigers, and they actually dance like it's a very fierce and valor dance also. Secondly, what is vaccine nationalism? Countries such as the US, which actually has 800 million doses, and UK 340 million doses, have pre-booked more coronavirus vaccines than their populations need, through agreements with the developers. And this actually we also had discussed earlier once, that what is happening is that many nations are already booking the vaccines from the potential countries that are on the way or on the verge of manufacturing the COVID vaccines. So they actually are booking them. But the biggest issue, wherein why we are calling it as vaccine nationalism, is that they are trying to procure the vaccines even greater than the number of their population. For example, if we have a population of 100 people in the country, they're procuring the vaccines, number of vaccines to be as of 250, for example. This definitely is not a problem for that country, because obviously it will have the vaccines in surplus. But for the countries that cannot actually pay more or extra for such vaccines, like for example the poorer countries, various African countries, where various smaller countries also, they will not be able to pay such high amounts for the vaccines. And if we are trying to buy and trying to make it a market, then definitely they'll fall short of the funds and they'll never be able to provide vaccines to their own people. And that is why these advance agreements are likely to make the vaccine inaccessible to large parts of the world, especially to the poor countries. So it should be known that what actually do we mean by vaccine nationalism. So this was all for today. We hope it was a good session for you. Stay tuned with LawSikho for such more sessions to come. Thank you so much.